Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our final session of the Checkpoint Summit, Breaking Benchmarks and Your Blueprint for Growth. My name is Josh Baez. I am a Senior Marketing Manager here at On24. Today, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by some of the truly best of the best. We've got our very own Tessa Barron, Latane Conant of Sixth Sense, and Foote of Drift, all here to help us leave today's event with some actionable steps to help us raise that bar across marketing, sales, and revenue success. So happy for you all to be here today. I'm going to dive right in. The first question that we want to ask today's panel is around how marketers can react and address to the benchmarks of their industry. So obviously, benchmarking can be somewhat of a tricky business, especially when you don't know where to start. It's becoming more and more crucial for our industry as it continues to accelerate and our buyers, continue to evolve. With so many different data points and measures of success, there's a lot of noise that we need to sift through. And I think, as marketers, we are expected to be able to break through these benchmarks in more meaningful ways. And so my question for this panel to kick us off is this. How should marketers begin to grapple with benchmark data? How can they start to improve, and how can they react to and address the benchmarks of their industry? Tessa, I would love for you to get us started.
All right, well, thank you, Josh, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Josh mentioned, this topic is near and dear to our hearts. I think it is to every marketer because we are always looking to do better. And you really have to start with defining what better looks like, what matters to your business. And I think that can sometimes be a pitfall of benchmarking altogether, is we assume one B2B benchmark will apply to our business, but we're all going to market in such different ways. My sales cycle might take a few months, whereas someone who offers a freemium product that a buyer can purchase with a swipe of a credit card, that's instantaneous. And so I think that it really does come down to understanding how did you do at the same time last year? What does that seasonally look like this year, quarter over quarter, month over month? And understanding how you're progressing against yourself and your baseline. And then looking outside to help inform, is that baseline off or is it not? And I think that will help ensure that in the context of your business, you're making progress versus you're going head to head with a competitor who may have a totally different set of resources and external factors that allow for them to hit a certain benchmark that you can't.
Yeah. Thanks, Tessa. Latane, what about your perspective on this?
My perspective may be a little bit different. So I think that you have to separate benchmarking from measurement. And the things, and I do agree that there are some things that are difficult to benchmark, but you need to measure. Things like ASPs, conversion rates, cycle times, based on your sales cycle and things like that, that can be very difficult to benchmark. And so, you want to look at your own trends over time. But I do think, and one of the things I talk about is like thinking of yourself not as marketing, but as market. And I do think there are things in your market that you can and should benchmark. And to me, what you need to do is you need to look at the overall marketing function and break it down into a lot of granularity in order to find meaningful benchmarks. So what we do is we take every single functional area, PR, AR, content production, social, organic, paid, website, all different kinds, like to that level of functionality. And then about every 6 months, we do a very detailed, true benchmark. And for each of those functional areas, the benchmarks could be a little bit different. And what I mean by that is some we are just looking at our immediate competitive set. Some we're looking at our immediate competitive set, but we're also looking at our ecosystem, right? Because there could be learnings there. So a good example would be our website. We want to look at our immediate competitive set, but we're also going to review people in our ecosystem that we really respect and we think has a freaking amazing website, and we could learn from that. And so, doing mystery shopping and, really, looking vis-a-vis at all these different websites, you probably just don't want to do your immediate competitive set. You probably want to do like a broader ecosystem. The industry benchmarks are really helpful. And the ones that I like the best are like the ones that PE firms provide. I think they can do a really good job of cohorting you, to Tessa's point, into companies that are about the same size, about the same funding level, about the same go-to-market. And so they can provide a lot of great benchmarks that can be very useful. And so we use a lot from Insight. And then, actually I find that vendors, so like On24 is a great example. One of the criteria we benchmark was our virtual events. And how well are our events going? And you guys have some great research on drop-offs and, how long people stay on. And we use that to say, are we delivering a good enough experience vis-a-vis these benchmarks? Drift has great benchmarks and we use Drift, so we use that. So that's kind of how we break it down, but we do get incredibly granular, I would say. And that's the key to it. And it's not about, beating our chest that, oh, we're the best. It's more about learning where can we do better.
Latane, you brought something up that I forgot to mention. In MarTech, vendors can really have a great source of information for benchmarks. Even if they don't publish a report, I love to ask, whenever we bring on a new technology into our stack, I love to ask, what does your marketing team do with your technology, and figure out how we can achieve what they've achieved. And that often allows for us to even go more granular than perhaps what's inside reports. And I will say, I've done that both with 6 Sense and Drift. So On24 is trying to use our Drift and our 6 Sense solutions in the same way that your own teams do, because you really are a best practice model. It's a great point.
Yeah. Thank you. And Katie, what about your perspective on all this? So we've talked a little bit about, how we benchmark. What about when it comes to your perspective?
Yeah, well, Tessa and Latane have covered so many great points. So I'll focus just for a moment on the common pitfalls we try to avoid when it comes to industry benchmarking and how you take in all that information. Today's modern marketer has so much access to data and to inputs, third-party, historical data within your organization. And I think your team can often fall into this trap of analysis paralysis. You just have to be careful. And this actually, Tessa made this point earlier, and I'll double down on it. You have to be careful that when you're taking in the data, it's one input to your overall strategy. And it can't be the input. You have to be able to synthesize and apply it within the context of your business, because every business is at a different age and stage and has slightly different goals and a trajectory. And so making sure that you use that filter and don't find yourself in this analysis paralysis swirl is something that we're always looking out for. The other analogy that I use that I think is helpful when you're trying to look through that filter is this idea of parenting. As a parent, there are millions of conflicting parenting books and advice. And again, you have to take in all of that information, synthesize it, and determine, okay, what makes the most sense for my business based on what we're trying to accomplish over the next 6 to 12 months.
I love that. I love that so much.
I think that is so important, Katie. And one thing that I do at the beginning of our benchmarking is I benchmark the size of our team. And I also, when I do the exec summary of the benchmarking, I highlight things that maybe we're not doing great at, but we don't care. Right? I mean, and back to the strategy, like, hey, it's interesting that other people, and I want to watch that, maybe TikTok is something that we need to look into down the road, but right now it's not our strategy, but we're watching it. And so I think just having the lens of what does your resources look like? Because we all have limitations. And then B, which of these things do you feel you do need to be number one at, and which ones are you just going to watch and maybe it doesn't matter for your strategy?
Yeah, this is actually such a great
too, right, Latane? Oh, sorry, Josh. I think it's the trade-offs too. If you're going to be top of your game at one thing, unless you have infinite resources, which none of us do, what are you maybe going to settle for being more in the middle of the pack at, or settle for being in the middle for right now? I think that constant exercise of saying, okay, well, if we double down and really focus here, then what is it that we're giving up is something that benchmarks miss, right? Because it doesn't explain what you might have to give up in order to achieve it. Which is, I think, just such an important point that you've made.
It's the difference in doing 5 things really, really well and 10 things mediocre.
I love that. Yeah, I mean,
I want to print it on my wall, Katie.
This is great, though. I mean, this conversation leads directly into the next question anyway, so I want to continue this thought. But it's around benchmarking essentials. So as we're thinking about how we even get started with this and all of the different factors that we're taking into account, like when we're thinking about how and who you benchmark against, what you use to start with, the critical components, the blind spots, we've already started to touch on this, but I'd love to dive in a little bit deeper. Latane, can you go into a little bit more detail around your process for benchmarking?
Yeah, and so when I lay it out, you're going to think it's insane, but to be honest, and the first time it was hard, but once you get into the routine and have the process somewhat established, it's actually not that hard or as hard. But to me, the first step, again, is looking at every single functional area and then breaking it down to that granularity. And so we have a big matrix. And then having the type of benchmark we want to use, is it direct competitor, ecosystem, industry, or like vendor provided? And then we have details on how to source and how to go about the benchmark. And then we execute, and then we come back and we give ourselves a score. A 0 means on par, plus better than the average, minus, trailing. And then just provide a little bit of, some summary notes. And that's like an executive summary that we can look at and share. And that's, again, what we provide the overlay commentary on, too. That's like something we haven't invested in yet or don't care about, or something that, we're really proud. We worked really hard. This, content was an area for us that we were underperforming. And so the benchmark allowed us to see that. And, now I'm really proud, we're crushing it. And that's an area that is important to us, right? Whereas, Twitter is an example of one where we were we're not doing that great, but we're not going to prioritize that. And so, and over time that may change. But it's also really a great way, I found, to highlight the team. So the team gets really into it because it really shows that their hard work is paying off and differentiating us in the market. And I think that's really important to be able to highlight. Sometimes the core marketing metrics aren't going to highlight the website design. And, but when you look at 6 different website designs on one page, and one is clearly terrible and one is clearly great, but that's not going to come out in the pipeline metrics, but it's still important to look at, and it's still an important part of marketing. So some of the benchmarks are subjective, and I'm okay with that, but it is a great way to actually highlight the team too, and show where they've done a really nice job.
Yeah, it's all part of this. I mean, everything sort of impacts everything else, but at the same time, you need to balance that with being good. Katie, it's like what you said, you're being great at 5 things versus being mediocre at 15, right? So I would love to get your perspective next, Katie, on this.
Yeah, so the way that we've talked about or thought about benchmarking data and really any inputs in general is what are we going to do with that information? Because that's what actually matters, right? How do we synthesize that? How do we make sense of it for our business? And actually, we've started a new process at Drift at the leadership level where we take in all of the information and data and we go through a process to form key assumptions. So what's happening in the market? What's some of the benchmarking and industry data that we're seeing that could allow us to form a hypothesis or make a key assumption? And the point of this exercise is we do that for the market, we do that for the hiring landscape, we do that for the product landscape. Like, what are all the things happening? What does that mean in terms of key assumptions that we can draw? And then how do those key assumptions, if we believe these things to be true, what does that then mean for our strategic growth initiatives and the goals we want to set? And I think there's a really important element here around timing. If we think about where we are today, from an economic standpoint versus where we were 6 months ago, the ground has shifted. And it's a great example of how, while you don't want to be like looking at new benchmarking data every month or every 2 weeks, because that'll have you chasing your tail, there is a seasonality to the information. And so we had key assumptions in January of last year that we are now revisiting and saying, you know what, our key assumptions based on the data we're seeing are different. Therefore, we're going to adjust our goals slightly and adjust our strategy moving forward. And so I think it's twofold. It's bring in the information, synthesize it for your business, and then make sure that your key underlying assumptions that shape your strategy align to that data and information so that you can make it actionable. And that's a new process that we've developed that we are really enjoying working through as a leadership team. It's driving a lot of alignment, both at our level, but across the entire organization.
Yeah, I love that idea of key assumptions. Like, you are interpreting the data to the best of your ability and addressing it in a way that enables better action and clear action to happen. And I think that, as we're thinking about benchmarking, blind spots are always something that is in the back of my mind whenever it comes to measurement. Like, am I thinking about everything? Am I forgetting something? And I think that, this process that you've been mentioning and talking about, Katie, like that's one way to, I think, better address those blind spots.
And the only other thing I would say to that point is, look, we make the best decision we can with the information we have. We can't predict the future. And so there's some level of like lock arms, jump together and do the best you can. And just getting comfortable with data will never give you all of the answers.
Yeah, I love that. Tessa, what's your take on this? So we've talked a little bit about blind spots and key assumptions and that leap of faith that Katie just mentioned. Love your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is such a human aspect to marketing, and which is why I'm so glad Latane brought up the injection of subjective benchmarks, because there is just as much art as there is science to what we do. Individuals are how we get there, and it's the ability for us to work together, how we collaborate, that is almost as much of as a factor as what we do. So I think that when it comes to performance, to just look at the output and not think about the input, you'd be missing something. Have you been short on team resources? Has someone been distracted by another project? All of that is so important, I think, to take into consideration, not just to be fair to ourselves, but to acknowledge the fact that marketing is inherently just as much art as it is science. And it's not just as simple as pushing a button. Technology doesn't do the work for you. You have to have a people and process built out first. And to that point, I think that there is also a blind spot that comes from looking at benchmarks in isolation and rather understanding how they all, where the domino effects take place, where are the interdependencies. So I'll give you an example. We are, I think similar to what you heard from Latane and Katie, we are hyper-focused on our website, on inbound, on that digital journey for our prospects and customers. But we know that if we were to just look at how many people came to certain pages and converted, that would be a very narrow way of looking at it. And so we built out a scorecard that's specific to digital, that's trying to be holistic to how that journey starts and what that looks like. So we think about how often are people searching for our brand? How does that compare to competitors? So what is that word of mouth? Then how does that manifest itself into traffic and also industry search terms. Then of that traffic, how much of it was paid organic? Then who came to what page? Then what did they do on it? And then what's the downstream effect? Because I think sometimes if you just come with an assumption that hasn't considered, and I think assumptions are super important, like Katie mentioned, but in that assumption, you have to consider all of the dependencies that could impact it and know where one piece is going to impact the other, so that you're being true to what the buyer's journey today looks like, because it isn't just one channel and it isn't just one tactic. It's how they all add up that really amounts to seeing that impact in pipeline or seeing what the data is going to tell you.
And Tessa, I think that's where the art and science really come together. If you are looking at data that says, social, for example, is the highest performing channel for your business, that doesn't mean put all of your dollars into social, right? It means put on your logical hat to say, okay, we have this data point, we will invest here, but what else do we need to do from an artistic standpoint to evoke emotion, to take people on that journey? That's really critical, that pairing of art and science.
And you can kind of feel it. I mean, I think that is something that all marketers, everyone, we shouldn't take for granted, that we have intuition, we have expertise, we have a gut for our buyers, for our customers. We've earned that because we've been doing the marketing. And so by having data sometimes overshadow that or get in the way, we're selling ourselves short. We know what is best for our buyer, and I don't think we should let data always make that decision for us. It should be a balance.
Yeah. And I think that balance, we've talked about all of the different dependencies and what's required to start benchmarking. I think that goes nicely into our last question around encouraging a culture of measurement. I think that as we're talking about these different dependencies and assumptions and behaviors and making sure that we're kind of seeing the full landscape for what it is, it requires our teams to have this culture and this foundation and this willingness to actually put in the work to measure and understand what's going on and want to make it better. So I would love to hear from this panel on this last question around how can marketing teams start to adopt and encourage a stronger culture of measurement? Katie, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, I love this phrase culture of measurement because it truly is everyone pulling in the same direction that makes a business successful. And I think especially for those of us who are managing younger teams who are earlier in their careers, this is a really important professional development moment for them to realize that we are actually running a business here. As much fun as marketing is, like we have to measure our work. Gone are the days of the Mad Men era where we could just look at brand campaigns. Like a marketer's job is really complex, and there's a lot of breadth and depth. And so I think this whole concept of making sure that everyone understands their contribution to the whole and to the entirety, and that it's not one team's metric or one team's measure, it's our collective measure that's critically important to bake into your culture. And the way that we do that, we have some rituals at Drift that I think are really important. So we start every week with a meeting called Monday Metrics, where every functional department comes and presents, how did we perform last week? How are we pacing to our goals? And that, again, creates, because it's the entire company and each department presenting, it's that culture, that reinforcement. And you do that through communication, through rituals and transparency. I do this with my own organization. So I post something to our whole team every week about, how are we performing? How is everyone contributing? It's our target, not my target or your target. And I think at the end of the day, we all are looking in our different functional areas for, website traffic, conversion rates, all of the usual KPIs that we're used to managing to. But at the end of the day, how is our business performing overall? What are our revenue and bookings targets looking like? Because that is a rising tide that will lift all boats. And as much as you can avoid vanity metrics and avoid kind of puffing up your chest and really being all in it as an organization and a team, I think creates that winning culture. The point of metrics and measurement is not to say how great you're doing, it's to truly understand how your business is performing. So if you do that with no ego and you communicate and you're transparent and everyone feels they have a sense of ownership, I think that's the key to creating that culture of measurement.
I love that. That's great. Thank you, Katie. Latane, I would love to get your thoughts on this next. So I know that you use the strategic planning tool V2MOM. I would love to hear about that and how you ingrain that into the culture at Six.
So I have a saying called find the red. And I think that part of adopting a culture around measurement is a culture around bringing forward problems and being okay with that. And the reason I bring that up is, sometimes you're looking for metrics to show something is working, but really what I think the culture needs to be about is let's keep digging until we find what's not working so we can fix it. Mm-hmm. And, that's part of the V2MOM process, because at the beginning of every year, V2MOM is a strategic planning framework, basically. V2 stands for vision and values, so that's the V2. And then MOM is method, owner, and measurement. And so we use this process at Sixth Sense coming out of the end of the year to plan for the next year. And you have to reflect on where things are going well and where things are not going well to come up with what are we going to change next. And so that's the V2MOM is not your financial plan. It's not saying we're going to double and this is going to be our NRR. And the V2MOM is like, how are we going to operate differently to accomplish that next level of financial performance? And so it's all about what are we going to do to change the business? It's time bound. So it's not your vision for the company forever. It's the vision for this year and what is different about this year than last year. And the moms, which are like what we're going to actually do, have clear owners on the executive team, and the metrics we read out to the company, every other week to say, this is how we're doing against, changing our business for the better. And guess what? It's okay to be red. I'd rather understand that I'm red and understand why I'm red than at the end of the year have not accomplished what I needed to accomplish to hit those financial objectives. So it also helps with like early warning detection of, where are we not progressing our strategy where we need to.
I love that. Great. Thank you, Latane. And finally, Tessa, as we are wrapping up here, when it comes to adopting and encouraging this culture of measurement, what are the actionable steps that marketers can think about as they're starting to build this in their own teams?
Oh, well, I think that we have hit on two consistent themes throughout this, and that's time, understanding how long it will take you to hit a benchmark, how often you should measure, and baking that right in to the process is so important. That also helps to capture context. What is it that you're trying to achieve? What are the external factors? What are the dependencies that are going to impact your ability to hit that goal? Team is, I would say, a third one, because we all know it takes not just one marketer, not just one tactic. It takes all of it working cohesively together. And in fact, it's not just about marketing. It's about sales and customer success and all the other functions as well. So really understanding how does this goal become something everyone can rally around or support in their own way. And where are those weaknesses? Where do you need that greater sense of alignment to achieve a certain result? And then the last thing, and this is, I think, much more tactical, Josh, but it's really understanding the difference between conversion and volume. And I say that because I think we can all acknowledge that we do not have infinite resources. In today's climate, we are all doing what we can to get more from less budget, less people, less bandwidth. And so I think it's up to us as marketers to figure out, how do we create a sustainable way to get better and not always have it mean adding more people, more volume, more leads in the funnel, but instead optimizing that conversion throughout. And that's where I think I'll go back full circle to where I started. having a pulse on that conversion rate, knowing the time that it's going to take to get it, knowing the people that are involved and all of the different dependencies, I think will ultimately help us be focused on the right things, and doing so in a way that's achievable.
I love that. What a way to wrap up everything that we've learned today, Tessa. So thank you for that. And thank you, Latane and Katie, for being here today as well.